hooking up with the ladies already. He's a talker. So I don't know how I'm going to follow that because he has a radio voice. But I'm here to talk about React Native Rally. And it's kind of a clever thing that one of my friends helped me with. Well, basically, talking about React Native, the platform for mobile using JavaScript, and accessibility. So basically, the talk is going to do two things. Talk about mobile accessibility, and it's going to talk about React Native. Who am I? My name is Jason Matthews. I'm a software developer, and that's it. So, the making of AccessNow. So, AccessNow is an app that helps you pinpoint locations and rate their level of accessibility. So, it helps you to find out if, say, a restaurant has an accessible entrance, or if you have an accessible washroom, because you might be able to get in, but the washroom is in the basement, for instance. So I'm going to play a little video that talk about the founder, Mayan thing, and how we met. I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory about that. But this clip is from CBC. She was featured on CBC 150. So Mayan Zing is a phenomenal person. I met her at a DevTO talk. She was there talking about AccessNow. And at the time, they had a website that allowed people to participate in crowdsourcing and pinpointing these places. But they didn't have an app. So I approached her and I said, Mayan, I'd love to help bring an app to iOS and to life. And so over a few months, we partnered. I brought it back to my office, and we got a few people to donate their time. So from designers to UX developers and project managers came together to make the AccessNow app for iOS. So what is accessibility? It's your ability to reach, approach, use, or understand. So more than 285 million people around the world have vision issues. And so that's a large number of people that need special tools or apps to be built a certain way that they can consume the content and use the app. So accessibility spans a wide variety of users. So from people who have limited eyesight, some people might even want to see something even smaller. For instance, some users have like very small range of sight, and so if something is smaller, they can actually see more within that peephole. Some people want some stuff to be larger. So as you grow older, maybe your eyesight deteriorates, so you want to be able to increase the font on your app. Some people have hearing issues. motor senses. So with apps, a lot of people use devices, like this is a device that's hooked up via Bluetooth to be able to interact with an app on their iPad. And the way they interact with the app is it navigates around all the elements on the screen, and as they get to an element, they can push a button and that element is activated. So if the app is not built properly, they won't be able to interact with it the way we want. And some people have cognitive issues. So this is generally speaking for all types of apps. You have to build them, or you should build them, so that they're easy to consume and they're not very cluttered. They have bite-sized information that you can get to really easy. So assistive tech in mobile. Let's go through a few of those. So on iOS, we have what is called VoiceOver. And so this is an option that you can activate within the settings of iOS. And it allows you to use gestures to navigate the app. For instance, this one is showing someone using a chat app, and say they're blind, for instance, they can still use a chat app, and that dark circle around that particular bubble, it would read out what that message says. On Android, they have what is called TalkBack, and it does the same thing as VoiceOver. It just goes through and read the content on the screen. But again, if your app is not built properly, you won't be able to interpret the things correctly. So how to create a great accessibility experience. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but I'm going to go over 3 things today. If you do these 3 things, you'll be able to get a great experience. Color contrast. So not only that people have low eyesight, low vision issues, but some people are colorblind too. So if you have your app set up a way where you have a button that's a primary button and a button that's a secondary button, but they have colors that looks very similar or look the same, if you're colorblind, then you have failed there, and you need to rejig and get that right. Dynamic text. So dynamic text is the ability to have different font size on your screen and not have the increase or decrease of that font size ruin the experience of your app. And label and buttons and icons. So this is a simple one that everyone can do to make their app work well. A lot of times it's easy to forget, having an icon that looks well, and you can, if your vision is good, you can interact with it very easily. But if you are using an assistive technology, it would just say button, and it wouldn't give you a lot of information regarding that. So if you have color contrast, if you want to check to see if your color contrast is good, there's a tool that you can use. That's the website for it. Basically, you can put in 2 X codes, color codes, and it will tell you if the contrast level is up to standard. So this is an example of dynamic text. And I picked out this screenshot because I liked it. But you can see, this is actually this Facebook app. This is actually my wife's screenshot. You can see the battery is 3%.
First world problems.
First world problems. Take the picture quick. But you can see the 2 experiences look good, even though this one is twice the size, the font size. So a lot of times we leave these things for last, but Facebook actually, sorry about that. Yeah, but Facebook does a really good job in keeping these things in mind. So you can increase the font, decrease the font, it will still look great. And descriptive labels. So, for instance, if I tap on that arrow, it doesn't have a label associated with it. But if you set this up correctly, you can specify the label that you want it to read. So as the user taps the thing, it will say navigate back, and they'll be able to use their assistive tool to navigate. So making apps accessible within React Native, AX API. AX is short for accessible. And API is application programming interface. So these are some of the things you can set on elements to be able to make them more accessible. And I'm going to go over each of these one by one. So accessible. So that first attribute, one at the top, if you set that on an element, it will make that entire element accessible. So for instance, here, if I set it on that row, say I set it on each of these rows, the entire row will be accessible, but not the content on the inside. So it would see it as one element instead of individual elements. But if you set it to false, and then you make these individual elements accessible, then your screen reader will be able to navigate down and go inside. So in this case, for the music app on iOS, it has 3 different functions within that single row. You can preview the song by clicking on the album cover, or if you click on the title, you can go to view the details, or if you click on that little pin thing there, you get like a context menu.
So with the screen, you'd have to like skip through preview, view details, context for like each individual song. You can't just have a container that's like, oh, I don't care about that song, skip the 3 steps or whatever.
What do you mean? Say
like if you said like, oh, the container is accessible, you know, but then you can dive into it. Like there's no way to do that. You have to make each individual.
Yeah, so you can do one or the other, right? So if you make the entire thing accessible, it acts as one component, and when you hit it, it does something.
No way to do it.
Right? So you can either you want everything accessible, or you want the individual things.
You know what I mean? Like there are like 5 actions for each song. You'd be like skip, or it would take a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So on accessible tab. So what this does, we had a problem. This is a picture of the AccessNow app. We had an issue in the app where this kind of solved the problem. When you tap on one of these map pins, it brings up a little bubble, or annotation they call it. And you can double tap on that annotation and it should take you to a details page. Now, this component that we're using, this map component, is a React Native map component that was produced by Airbnb. Airbnb has a really active space in the React Native community, but they don't handle this experience very well. So we wanted to know, is somebody tapping this to be able to do something different from when they're using it without the on-screen screen reader? And so we had to tap into this on accessibility option to be able to navigate. So this is some code. I didn't have much code here because I find that too much code gets boring after a while. But so what this is showing an example of a custom button. So I'm using one of the React Native bounce, what do you call it? This particular one, it allows the button to bounce. So if you wrap your thing in this, it will, when you click on it, it does a little bouncy. But by default, anything that's touchable is accessible by default. So in this case, what it will do is it will read all its children and pick up any text that's within its children and use that as a label. Now, if you don't want to use that, the content as a label, you have to then specify what you want your label to be by saying accessible label equals whatever it is. And then you, because this is not a button by default, this is just a view that I'm making into a button, you have to add a trait to it, which this tells iOS that this is a button and it treats it a certain way and the screen reader will act in a particular way. And finally, after you have done all your stuff, you have done all your due diligence to make your app really accessible, you have to test it and audit it and make sure that it's truly accessible. And these tools are, this accessibility inspector is in Xcode. You can launch that. This is an app from Android from Google called Accessibility Scanner. You can use that to evaluate your Android apps. It will go through, scan your apps, and tell you where the problems are and how to fix them.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
What would you say the biggest accessibility challenge is to using handheld devices?
The biggest challenge, because the user is very slow for them. Well, so when I'm testing, maybe it's fast for them because they're used to using it that way. So you don't want to have too much stuff on the page, right? So you want it to be very concise, very easy to consume. And so it's a challenge between designing something that's really compelling and designing something that's really accessible. So for designers, it's a really big challenge to do that. And I think for us as an agency, that's always the biggest challenge. But if you're willing to do it, you can create something really good. Like Facebook, for instance, is one of the most used apps in the App Store, and it's very accessible. So it's possible.
When it comes to UI UX, is there any difference between the design in order to be accessible, the regular user, or is it all combined?
Well, typically you want to look at it as you're designing for all users, right? You want to look at it as, because when you design an app that's accessible, everyone wins, basically. Grandma wins, you know, Mayan wins, everyone wins. And so if you go from that angle, you'll be able to build an experience that anyone will enjoy. Whereas the opposite is not true. If you build it without accessibility, some will enjoy it, but some won't.
Is it, I guess, easier, for lack of a better phrase, to develop for iOS or Android in your experience?
Well, React Native in particular was developed to help that, right? So React Native is a platform that allows you to build for both platforms using one piece of technology.
Right.
Right. So and React Native is very easy to understand, very easy to reason about. So it's getting a lot of traction. A lot of people are developing new apps on that platform. The Uber Eats, for instance, very good app that's done in React Native.
So then I guess the question would be then, how well does React Native translate to either iOS or Android, and is one better than the other?
Well, they translate very well, because the idea behind React Native is, which is different from some of the hybrid platforms in the past, they intend to make real native apps. So what happens is, there's three pieces to it. There's the React piece, there's what is called JS Core, which sits in the middle, and then there's the native, the way you would build it without React.
Sure.
So things go through the React, then it goes to the core, and then it starts building stuff in the native experience. So what you end up getting is a truly native app. And so if you were to build it with Objective-C or Swift or one of those languages that Apple produce, or you build it with this, the resulting app is a truly native one.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
So I don't know if this is like a legitimate metaphor or whatever, but when mobile web design started coming out, this concept of mobile first development became a movement. So you develop for your mobile device, and then you would, rather than fall back, you would fall forward, or you build forward towards like a desktop, for example. And I'm wondering if that same analogy would apply to the accessibility. Like if you build for full accessibility first, and then you build layers on top of that for a more enhanced experience for somebody who's got those extra, visual abilities or whatever.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a good point. If you start there, then you're ahead of the game. And one thing to note that all of the components that come native on these platforms, whether iOS or Android or even Windows, all of these components come by default as accessible. These developers like myself go in and mess it up and make it not accessible. But by default it's accessible, and trying to maintain that is the better approach.
So what you're saying is that the programmer awareness is the real problem.
Yeah, programmers and designers too, because it's a collaborative effort, right? So if a designer wants something that does something weird and it doesn't really translate in an accessible experience, then the developer will build a thing that is not accessible. So it's a collaborative effort.
Are there any, with respect to React Native, are there any accessibility things that aren't available compared to, let's say, a native app?
So far, React Native is created by Facebook.
Yep.
And so far they have done a phenomenal job in making this happen. And the reason why it's so feature rich and so covered in terms of accessibility is because all they're doing is exposing the already accessible iOS pieces and Android pieces. So they're just leveraging whatever is already available and giving you access to that.
So there shouldn't be any delta.
There shouldn't be any delta.
Seems that you guys were volunteering time for application construction managers, UI designers, developers. What was the most challenging part of the tech experience? What was the main obstacle?
The main
We all
obstacle.
know that we have to work in that spot.
Exactly. The main obstacle is, so I work for a digital agency, and so all your time is billable. So when you're not working, that's not billable time. And so that's the most challenging thing. So people worked, we started out doing hackathons where we started out at the DMZ, Ryerson DMZ. We'll go there for a weekend and we'll just like spend the entire weekend hacking. And our company will provide lunch and everything that we need. And then people would use their time in the evenings or between projects. They would pretend that they're doing something else and put in time like that.
So is your app had any issues you couldn't solve in React Native and you had to do native code?
No. Because what we end up doing, we end up building it with things that we know were available. So we didn't get into where it pushes the barrier so far that we couldn't build something.
Has the app been doing well? I don't know when it launched, but
Yeah, it launched late last year, October, and it's been doing well. It's good ratings on iOS. I think it's still 5 stars. It's very simple in terms of what it's offering. There's a lot more features to come. Some of the features are actually in the app, but it's hidden.
yeah.
But yeah, it's been doing great. And Mayan is you should look her up after this. She's phenomenal, and she's a really good spokesperson for the app.
Are you aware of any testing frameworks that help? Testing for accessibility?
Yes, there's a few frameworks that, well, the tool that I showed you are really good for testing your app. And it's not just for React Native apps, but any app at all. Whether you're building it in Java or Objective-C, you can use it to test your framework. And I'm glad you asked that question, because a side note to that is when your app is accessible, it's easier to write automated tests for UI tests, where you're testing if your UI is functioning correctly. When it's accessible, it's easier because you have everything labeled right, and you can check if something is doing what it should do, because it's just like when you have it all labeled correctly and you have a testing tool, the testing tool is doing the same sort of reading that a screen reader will be doing. And so it makes testing a lot easier when your app is accessible as well.
In your day job, are you also developing apps accessibly? And if so, kind of like how much would you say like costs in terms of like overall in terms of just hacking an app and not caring about accessibility?
Well, I'm really an advocate for what I call the SPA of apps, which is security, performance, and accessibility. It's usually the non-sexy parts of building software, but I really like those parts because I think it's important when an app is performant, accessible, and have security built in. And so I'm always pushing for that. So if we're building something, I'm always the one that's saying, is this accessible? Do you have the right tags here? And people usually are not going to say, I don't care if it's accessible, screw you, you know? So it hasn't, I don't know what a cost is. It's hard to say, but I think it's worth it.
You have to like go back and forth with design a lot?
You know what I'm finding? I'm finding designers are becoming more aware of these things. And if you bring it up, they're not quick to dismiss it. They're usually, well, for my company anyway, they would listen and say, okay, all right, we'll try to consider that.
When you deal with accessibility at your day-to-day job, is it mostly labels or screen scanners, or also font sizes? Because personally, I found that dealing with different font sizes is just not an option. It takes too much time for us to support screens for small, normal, or huge size. Like, what do we see with a huge size font?
Yeah.
And it seems like this is a fault of the framework, the system itself, and not the developer.
Yeah, so with font size, where we talked about dynamic text, I believe that it can be done. So all the big players doing really, really well. So check out any like app that you find that is one of the best apps that you use. Change the font and you'll see it looks great, even on. So Facebook is one. Try Instagram. Try any one of the big players. They do a really good job with it. So it's difficult, but I think if you start big and work your way back, you'll be able to solve this problem.
It's also worth noting that you are legally obligated to make everything accessible now.
Yes.
And as of January next year, all of the grievances or allowances of text will be taken away. So everyone that produces something new will have to meet the AOD.
Yeah,
So you better start now.
yeah, it shouldn't be such a task to do this, because it actually, like as a business benefit, you have more users, and so it's harder work, I guess, so people don't want to engage in it.
Is there a particular type of accessibility that's particularly difficult to develop for? Let's say cognitive versus color versus tactile.
Develop for, I'd say, one of the hardest things to do nowadays is a lot of these apps are very fluid, and they have things going on here and here and here and here. And how do you notify the user about everything that's going on without overflowing them with information? I think that's pretty difficult to do. Like you might have a Facebook app, you're getting a notification here, something else is going on over here, someone is requesting something here. How do you have the same experience with that person that needs to use an assistive technology and someone who is just looking at that? So that's pretty difficult, and there's things to help with that, but I don't think it's completely perfect.
Do you think it's fair to go to market without an accessible app and then upgrade it, or just rip right out of that?
No, I think it's very tough to go back. In software, it's usually a graveyard of bad code. So you go in and I'll fix this, and then 10 years later it's not fixed. It becomes a standard in your code and it's bad. So it's better just do it right the first time.
No such thing as temporary.
Yeah.
I was involved.
Yeah, temporary becomes permanent really quick.
So have you done any accessibility beyond like phones, like tablets, wearables? Any of those other
I've never touched wearables. Our tablets are pretty much very similar to mobile, but wearables I've never experienced that where that's concerned. Maybe that's next.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you.